to today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Glass. Neil Harrington had built his life like he built his custom homes, with precision, patience, and an uncompromising eye for quality. At 42, he'd established Harrington Custom Homes as one of the most prestigious construction companies in Washington state, turning his grandfather's small contracting business into a multi-million-dollar operation that specialized in luxury residences along the Pacific Northwest coast. His 15-year marriage to Vanessa had produced 2 children, Thomas, now 14, and Cassidy, 12. From the outside, the Harringtons appeared to be the quintessential American success story, affluent, attractive, and admired within their exclusive Lake Sammamish community. Neil's relationship with his parents, Howard and Diane Harrington, had always been one of high expectations. Howard, a former state judge, and Diane, who headed several prestigious charity boards, had groomed Neil to be exceptional from childhood. Their approval was conditional, their disappointment swift, and their pride in Neil's accomplishments always tinged with the suggestion that he could have done better. "You know, your father always hoped you'd follow him into law," Diane would often say. Even as she accepted Neil's invitation to dinner at a restaurant he couldn't have afforded without his disappointing career choice. Neil's sister, Patricia, 7 years his junior, had followed their father's path, becoming a corporate attorney and their parents' new golden child. Neil had made peace with his secondary status, focused instead on his own family, until the day he discovered the truth about his wife. Vanessa Harrington, née Sullivan, had been the marketing director for a luxury real estate firm when they met. Smart, sophisticated, and surprisingly warm despite her polished exterior, she'd captivated Neil with her genuine interest in his craft. Or so he thought. The first fracture in their foundation appeared subtly. A string of late nights at the office, a new perfume he didn't recognize, a curious distance in her eyes when he talked about their future. "I'm just stressed about the Westlake portfolio," she'd explained, kissing him distractedly before disappearing into their home office with her phone. Neil might have believed her if Bryce Sullivan, her cousin and Neil's project manager, hadn't pulled him aside after 3 beers at the company Christmas party. "There's something you should know," Bryce had said, voice low, "about Vanessa and Roger Fletcher." Roger Fletcher. The name hit Neil like a physical blow. The charismatic venture capitalist who had recently hired Neil's company to build his vacation home on Whidbey Island. The same man who had taken a peculiar interest in Neil's wife, requesting her specifically to consult on the interior design choices. "What about them?" Neil had asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. "They've been seeing each other for months. I caught them at the Edgewater Hotel when I was meeting a client." Bryce's eyes held genuine regret. "I wouldn't tell you if I wasn't sure, man. There's more. They've been talking about their future. Together." The revelation had sent Neil into a controlled freefall. He'd excused himself from the party, driven home, and spent the night reviewing security camera footage from their home that he'd installed during a recent renovation. The cameras Vanessa didn't know about. The evidence was damning. Roger, visiting their home while Neil was at construction sites. The familiar way he navigated their kitchen, their living room, their bedroom. Conversations about Neil that ranged from dismissive to cruel. "He's so caught up in his little houses," Vanessa had laughed, as Roger pulled her close. "He'll never suspect a thing. He's too trusting, too focused on giving everyone the benefit of the doubt." That night, Neil Harrington's fundamental nature shifted. The man who believed in second chances and giving people the benefit of the doubt died quietly in his home office at 3:17 a.m., watching his wife kiss another man in the kitchen Neil had built with his own hands. In his place emerged a man who would never trust blindly again. A man who understood that forgiveness was a luxury afforded to those who had never been truly betrayed. By morning, Neil had composed himself and begun to plan. Not just a divorce. That would be too simple, too expected. No, Neil Harrington would dismantle the life of everyone who had betrayed him with the same methodical precision he used to build his custom homes. But first, he needed to gather his materials. Chapter 2. Fault Lines. "I want a divorce," Neil announced 1 month later, sliding a manila envelope across the kitchen island to Vanessa. She blinked, manicured fingers freezing around her coffee mug. "What are you talking about?" "I know about Roger," Neil said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "I know about the Edgewater Hotel. I know about the plans you've been making. I know that he's been in our home, in our bedroom, when I've been working to provide for this family. Vanessa's face cycled through shock, denial, and calculation before settling on indignation. You've been spying on me? That's illegal, Neil. No judge will. Washington is a single-party consent state for recordings, Neil interrupted. And as for video surveillance in my own home, that's perfectly legal. But we're getting off track. The papers are straightforward. I'm giving you the lake house and a fair settlement. I want primary custody of the kids with reasonable visitation for you. Primary custody? Vanessa's voice rose sharply. You can't be serious. You work 60 hours a week. The kids barely see you as it is. That changes starting today. I've restructured the company. Bryce is taking over day-to-day operations. I'll be working from home most days. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. This isn't about the kids. This is about punishing me. Neil leaned forward. No, Vanessa. This is about protecting them from a mother who put her selfish desires above their stability and future. Sign the papers. Or don't. Either way, this marriage is over. The divorce proceedings began amicably enough before deteriorating into what Neil's attorney, Sylvia Patel, called one of the most vicious custody battles she'd seen in 20 years of family law. Vanessa's first move was to contact Neil's parents, spinning a tale of Neil's controlling behavior and emotional abandonment. Howard and Diane Harrington, who had always found their daughter-in-law charming and their son somewhat rigid, didn't require much convincing. Your father and I are concerned, Diane said during an unexpected visit to Neil's temporary apartment. Vanessa says you installed cameras without her knowledge, that you barely speak to the children, that you're trying to ruin her financially. Did she mention she's been sleeping with Roger Fletcher for the past year? Neil asked flatly. Or that she and Roger have been planning to take the kids to California once his tech investment pays off? Did she show you the text messages where she calls me a stepping stone to the life she really wants? Diane's expression tightened. Everyone makes mistakes, Neil. Marriage requires forgiveness. Your father and I have weathered our storms. This isn't a storm, Mom. It's a Category 5 hurricane that's been building for years while I worked to give her everything she wanted. Neil stood, signaling the end of the conversation. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, your perfect daughter-in-law isn't telling you the whole truth. But sides were taken, lines were drawn, and as summer turned to fall, Neil found himself increasingly isolated from his family. Patricia, predictably, aligned with their parents. Thanksgiving brought the first major holiday decision. The children would spend it with Vanessa at Howard and Diane's home. Neil was invited as an afterthought, a courtesy gesture he declined. Instead, he spent the day with Cassidy, who had chosen to stay with him despite the family pressure. Thomas, unfortunately, had fallen under his grandparents' and mother's influence, growing increasingly distant and hostile toward Neil. Why does everyone hate you now? Cassidy asked bluntly as they shared pumpkin pie on Neil's apartment balcony. Neil considered his daughter, perceptive, resilient, and unflinchingly loyal. They don't hate me, sweetheart. They're angry because I won't play the role they've assigned me. Which is what? The villain who graciously exits stage left so everyone else can have their happy ending. Neil squeezed her hand. But here's the thing about real life. There are no clear heroes and villains. Just people making choices and living with the consequences. Cassidy nodded solemnly. Mom called you stubborn and vindictive yesterday. Grandma said you were being childish. Neil felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice calm. What do you think? I think. Cassidy paused, choosing her words carefully. I think you're like one of those volcanoes that looks dormant until it's not. Everyone forgot there was fire underneath. Neil stared at his 12-year-old daughter with newfound respect. That's surprisingly insightful. She shrugged. I read it in a book. But it fits you. As November faded into December, the custody arrangement remained in flux, with a final hearing scheduled for January. The divorce had become Vanessa versus Neil, with Roger Fletcher lurking in the background, providing financial and emotional support while maintaining a public distance to avoid complicating the proceedings. Then came the Christmas invitation that would ignite Neil's dormant volcano. Chapter 3, The Ultimatum. The envelope arrived on December 15th, hand-delivered by Patricia, who stood awkwardly on Neil's doorstep, as if making a hostile diplomatic visit to foreign soil. Mom asked me to give you this, she said, avoiding his eyes. She wants you to RSVP by tomorrow. Neil took the envelope. Come in, Patty. It's freezing out there. I can't stay, Patricia replied stiffly. I have a deposition in an hour. 5 minutes. For coffee. We haven't spoken properly in months. Patricia hesitated before stepping inside, her body language screaming discomfort. Nice place, she commented, glancing around Neil's newly purchased townhouse, smaller than his previous home, but elegantly renovated by his own hands. It works for me and Cassidy, Neil replied, handing her a mug of coffee he'd prepared in anticipation of her acceptance. He knew his sister's weaknesses. She'd never resist good coffee. How is she? Patricia asked, a hint of genuine concern breaking through her facade. Thriving, actually. Straight A's, made the debate team. She's with her friend Zoe today, holiday shopping. Neil sat across from Patricia. Thomas won't take my calls. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. He's processing. Teens are complicated. So are families, Neil countered, tapping the envelope. Speaking of which, he opened it, extracting an embossed invitation to the annual Harrington family Christmas celebration. The handwritten note from his mother at the bottom caused his body to go perfectly still. Neil, we're inviting Vanessa as she's still family regardless of your situation. For harmony's sake, we feel it would be best if Cassidy didn't attend this year. Thomas will be there with Vanessa. If you can't respect our wishes, perhaps it's better you celebrate elsewhere. Love, Mom. Patricia watched Neil's face carefully. She's trying to keep the peace, she offered weakly. Neil folded the invitation precisely along its creases. By uninviting my daughter from her own family's Christmas? The same daughter who's been excluded from every family gathering since the divorce began? While welcoming my adulterous soon-to-be ex-wife. Vanessa has been part of the family for 15 years, Patricia said defensively. And she's Thomas's mother. He wants her there. And Cassidy is what? Collateral damage. Neil's voice remained controlled, but his eyes had hardened to granite. Tell me, Patty, will Roger be joining the festivities too? Should I send a gift for him? Patricia flushed. That's not fair. Mom and Dad don't approve of that situation. They've made that clear to Vanessa. Yet they've chosen her over their own grandchild. Neil stood, indicating the end of their conversation. Give Mom my response. Neither Cassidy nor I will be imposing on your Christmas harmony. We'll celebrate somewhere we're both welcome. After Patricia left, Neil sat motionless at his kitchen counter, the invitation lying before him like a declaration of war. Every slight, every betrayal, every moment his family had chosen Vanessa over him, and Cassidy crystallized into a single, razor-sharp purpose. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Sylvia Patel. I need everything we have on Vanessa and Roger ready by tomorrow. Every text, every email, every surveillance photo. And I need you to file an emergency motion regarding Thomas. The second call was to Bryce Sullivan. Remember that contingency plan we discussed? It's time. And I need a favor on Christmas morning. When Cassidy returned from shopping, cheeks flushed with winter cold and eyes bright with holiday excitement, Neil made her favorite hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and sat her down for a difficult conversation. Grandma and Grandpa have made a decision about Christmas, he began carefully. Cassidy's face fell immediately. They don't want me there, do they? Just like Thanksgiving. Neil considered sugarcoating the truth, but decided his daughter deserved better. They've invited your mother and Thomas. They suggested you, and I celebrate elsewhere. Because I chose to live with you, Cassidy concluded, her young face hardening with understanding beyond her years. Possibly, but their choices don't define your worth, Cass. Never forget that. Cassidy stared into her mug. So what are we doing for Christmas then? Neil smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in days. How does Christmas in Hawaii sound? Just you and me, sunshine instead of snow, and absolutely no family drama. Cassidy's eyes widened. Seriously? What about school? You're on break until January 6th. We'll be back by then. What about Mom and Thomas? And your work? I've already arranged coverage at work. As for your mom and brother, they've made their choices. We're making ours. That night, after Cassidy went to bed, Neil sat in his study reviewing the final pieces of evidence Sylvia had sent over. Text messages between Vanessa and Roger discussing their future plans. Financial records showing suspicious transfers. And most damning of all, a recording of Vanessa coaching Thomas on what to say to the custody evaluator. Just tell them you're afraid of Dad sometimes, Vanessa's voice urged. That he seems angry all the time now. You don't have to lie, just emphasize certain things. But I'm not afraid of Dad. Thomas had protested weakly. Do you want us to be separated? Do you want to be forced to live with him half the time? Away from your friends, your school, me? Neil closed the laptop, a cold clarity settling over him. His family, parents, sister, wife, even his son, had betrayed him in ways both small and catastrophic. They'd chosen comfort over truth, appearances over loyalty, the path of least resistance over standing for what was right. He opened a new document on his computer and began to type. To my family, Christmas has always been about truth. The birth of Christ brought a difficult truth into a world that wasn't ready to hear it. This Christmas, I'm following that example. For the next 3 hours, Neil Harrington crafted the third option neither his parents nor Vanessa had anticipated. Not attendance with quiet dignity, not absence with silent resentment, but truth, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel and the force of a wrecking ball. Chapter 4. Calculated Decimals. Neil Harrington had always understood the power of preparation. As a builder, he knew that what happened before the first nail was driven often determined the success or failure of the entire project. Now, with Christmas 10 days away, he applied that same methodical approach to dismantling the carefully constructed facade his family had built. The flights are confirmed. Maya Winters, Neil's new assistant, reported during their morning meeting. A former military intelligence officer who had transitioned to private security, Maya had come highly recommended by a client and had quickly proven herself invaluable. You and Cassidy leave on the 23rd. The house in Kauai is stocked and ready. Local security is in place. Neil nodded, reviewing the itinerary. And the other arrangements? All set. Bryce will deliver the packages at 8 a.m. Christmas morning, as requested. The digital materials are prepared and timed for delivery at 8:15. The legal team is on standby, and we have confirmation that all parties will be present at your parents' home. Including Roger? Maya's expression tightened slightly. Yes, our source confirms he arrived yesterday, supposedly to support Vanessa through a difficult holiday. He's staying at the guest house. Neil felt a cold satisfaction. Perfect. All the players would be on stage for the final act. And Thomas? Maya's eyes softened. He's still planning to attend. The court-appointed psychologist's report came in this morning. She hesitated. Neil, you should prepare yourself. It's not favorable. Neil took the sealed envelope, already knowing what it contained. Vanessa's manipulation of Thomas had been thorough and effective. The boy was angry, confused, and had found it easier to direct his pain toward the parent who wasn't constantly working to shape his narrative. Thank you, Maya. That will be all for now. After she left, Neil opened the report and scanned its contents, his jaw tightening as he read the psychologist's assessment. Thomas Harrington, 14, expresses significant anxiety regarding his relationship with his father. He reports feeling pressured to choose sides and states that his father changed overnight following the separation. While there is no evidence of physical abuse or neglect, Thomas's emotional distress when discussing potential custody arrangements with his father is notable. Neil set the report aside, allowing himself one moment of pure grief for the relationship that was slipping away from him. Then he returned to his computer, making final adjustments to the video he had spent weeks perfecting. The doorbell rang at precisely 4:30 p.m. Neil opened it to find Detective Lori Maddox standing on his porch, her expression professional but friendly. Mr. Harrington, she greeted him. Thank you for your time. Detective, please come in. Neil led her to his study, where Maya had laid out coffee and the files they had discussed earlier. I've reviewed the materials you sent over, Detective Maddox began, accepting the coffee. Normally, this wouldn't rise to the level of criminal investigation, but given the financial implications and the custody situation, I understand it's complicated, Neil acknowledged. I'm not looking to press charges at this point. I simply want this information in official hands before I proceed with my own response. Detective Maddox raised an eyebrow. Your response? Legal and civil, Neil clarified. Everything I plan to do falls within my rights, but I anticipate accusations once I reveal what I know. Mr. Harrington, if you're anticipating criminal allegations, perhaps you should reconsider whatever you're planning. Neil smiled thinly. I appreciate your concern, Detective, but everything I'm about to do is perfectly legal, morally justified, even. It's simply unprecedented in my family's experience. After the detective left, Neil received a text from Cassidy. Dad, can I stay at Zoe's tonight? Her mom is taking us ice skating tomorrow morning. Neil replied, Of course. Have fun. Love you. With Cassidy safely away from home, Neil made one final call to Sylvia Patel. Everything is in place, she confirmed. The emergency motion has been filed under seal. Judge Watkins will review it on the 26th. Are you absolutely certain about this, Neil? Once it's done, there's no going back. I passed the point of no return the moment I found out the truth, Neil replied. They've left me no choice but to respond in kind. That night, Neil downloaded the last piece of evidence. Bank records showing that Roger Fletcher had begun transferring substantial funds to an offshore account in Vanessa's name 6 months before the separation. The timing aligned perfectly with Roger's decision to hire Neil's company for his vacation home, a project that had kept Neil working late nights and weekends while Roger cultivated his relationship with Vanessa. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated plan to access Neil's expertise while systematically undermining his marriage and plotting to take his children. Neil added the records to the video compilation, narrating dispassionately. As you can see, while I was designing and building Roger's dream home on Whidbey Island, working overtime to meet his exacting specifications, he was transferring money to my wife and planning their future together. A future that, according to their own messages, included relocating my children to California without my knowledge or consent. He paused the recording, rubbing his eyes tiredly. The betrayal still cut deep, but the pain had transformed into something harder, more focused. The Neil Harrington who had trusted implicitly was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned to weaponize truth against those who had used his good nature against him. Time for the final touch, he murmured, adding the conclusion to his Christmas message. Chapter 5, Structural Integrity. December 22nd arrived with heavy snow that blanketed the Seattle area, transforming Neil's neighborhood into a scene from a holiday card. The irony wasn't lost on him. This picture-perfect Christmas setting forming the backdrop to his family's implosion. Neil's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. We're still hoping you'll reconsider our Christmas invitation. Thomas is asking if you'll be there. We can discuss Cassidy's situation after the holidays. Neil stared at the message, noting the careful phrasing. Not, Thomas wants you there, but Thomas is asking if you'll be there. A subtle but significant distinction. And Cassidy's situation, as if his daughter were a problem to be managed rather than a child who had been hurt by their rejection. He opted not to respond. At noon, Neil met with Bryce Sullivan at a small cafe far from their usual haunts. Bryce, looking uncomfortable in the unfamiliar setting, slid a thumb drive across the table. It's all there, he said quietly. The text messages, the photos from the company retreat, the recordings from Roger's house during construction. Are you sure about this, Neil? It's nuclear. Neil pocketed the drive. They went nuclear first. I'm just responding appropriately. Bryce shifted nervously. Vanessa's my cousin. When I told you about her and Roger, I never thought it would come to this. What did you think would happen, Bryce? That I'd quietly accept my wife's betrayal? That I'd shake Roger's hand and wish them well while they took my children and the life I built? Of course not. But this, Bryce gestured vaguely. This is going to destroy people. Not just Vanessa and Roger. Your parents. Thomas, have you thought about what this will do to him? Neil's expression hardened. I've thought about nothing else for months. Thomas is being manipulated by his mother and grandparents. They're using him as a weapon against me. This is my only chance to break through that manipulation before it's too late. And if it backfires? If it only pushes him further away? Then at least I'll have fought for him with everything I have, Neil answered, standing to signal the end of their conversation. Sometimes, Bryce, the only way to save what matters is to burn everything else to the ground. That evening, as Neil helped Cassidy pack for their Hawaii trip, his daughter's perceptiveness once again caught him off guard. Dad, she said carefully, folding a summer dress. What are you planning to do about Mom and Thomas and everyone? Neil paused, deciding how much to reveal. What makes you think I'm planning anything? Cassidy gave him a look that reminded him forcefully of himself. You've been working late every night. You have secret meetings with Bryce and your lawyer. You keep checking your phone like you're waiting for something important. And you've been different. Calmer, but like, scary calm. Neil sat on the edge of her bed. You're too smart for your own good. You know that. So you are planning something. Let's just say I'm making sure that the truth comes out. The whole truth, not just the convenient parts that make me look like the villain. Cassidy considered this. Will it hurt Thomas? The question hit Neil like a physical blow. I don't want it to, he answered honestly. But sometimes the truth hurts before it heals. Thomas deserves to know what's really happening, even if it's painful at first. Will it hurt, Mom? Neil chose his words carefully. Your mom has made choices that have consequences. The truth will force her to face those consequences. Cassidy nodded slowly. Is that why we're going to Hawaii? So we're not here when it happens? Partly, Neil admitted. But also because you deserve a happy Christmas with someone who puts you first, always. Cassidy reached over and hugged him fiercely. I'm glad I chose you, she whispered. Neil held his daughter close, momentarily doubting his course of action. Was he doing the right thing? Or was he simply responding to hurt with more hurt, perpetuating a cycle that would eventually claim Cassidy as its victim too? But then he remembered the invitation, the casual cruelty of excluding his daughter while welcoming the woman who had betrayed their family. He remembered Thomas's increasing hostility, fueled by Vanessa's manipulation. He remembered his parents' willingness to believe the worst of him without question. No, this wasn't about revenge. This was about truth, justice, and protecting what remained of his family, even if that family had narrowed to just him and Cassidy. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the airport, Neil received a call from an unexpected source, Howard Harrington. Son, his father began awkwardly. Your mother tells me you haven't responded to her message. I've been busy preparing for a trip with Cassidy, Neil replied neutrally. A trip? During Christmas? Neil, be reasonable. This is a family holiday. Exactly. And yet you've excluded your granddaughter from the family gathering. Howard sighed heavily. That was, perhaps, an overreaction. We were trying to avoid conflict. By choosing Vanessa over Cassidy. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Dad. You chose sides. You chose the side that was easier, more comfortable, less disruptive to your holiday plans. You chose the woman who betrayed your son over the grandchild who needed your support. A long silence followed before Howard spoke again, his voice strained. We can discuss this when you return. For now, Thomas is asking to see you. Could you at least stop by tomorrow morning? Before you leave? For his sake. Neil closed his eyes, tempted by the opportunity to see his son. But he recognized the manipulation for what it was, another attempt to force him into the role they had assigned him. The penitent ex-husband, gratefully accepting whatever scraps of family connection they deigned to offer. I'll be out of town tomorrow, Dad. Merry Christmas to you all. As he ended the call, Neil sent a text to Bryce confirming the final arrangements, then turned to Cassidy with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ready for some sunshine, kiddo? As their plane took off from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, Neil watched the snow-covered landscape recede beneath them. In less than 48 hours, the carefully constructed reality his family had built would collapse like a house with a compromised foundation. And like any good builder, Neil Harrington would be far away when the structure failed, ready to begin construction on something new and infinitely stronger from the rubble. Chapter 6. Blueprint for Demolition. The ocean view from their Kauai rental was breathtaking. Turquoise water stretching to the horizon, palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze, and not a snowflake in sight. Neil watched as Cassidy explored the property, her face alight with wonder at the private pool and lush tropical garden. This is amazing, Dad, she called, running back to where he stood on the lanai. Can we go to the beach today? Neil checked his watch. 3 p.m. in Hawaii, 6 p.m. in Seattle. Absolutely. Let's change and head down there before sunset. As Cassidy disappeared into her room, Neil's phone buzzed with a message from Maya. All systems go. Bryce confirmed delivery scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Digital package ready for 8:15 deployment. Legal team on standby. Enjoy your holiday. Neil sent a brief acknowledgement, then set his phone to do not disturb. For the next 12 hours, he would focus solely on giving Cassidy the Christmas Eve she deserved. They spent the afternoon swimming in the warm Pacific waters, building sand castles, and hunting for shells along the shoreline. For dinner, Neil had arranged a private chef who prepared fresh seafood and tropical fruits on their lanai. As the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and pink, Neil found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in months. This is the best Christmas Eve ever, Cassidy declared, licking mango sorbet from her spoon. Way better than sitting at Grandma's listening to everyone pretend everything's fine when it's not. Neil regarded his perceptive daughter thoughtfully. You noticed that too, huh? Duh. Everyone's super fake there. Mom acts all perfect. Grandma pretends she doesn't totally favor Aunt Patricia. Thomas tries to be whatever person everyone wants him to be. Cassidy shrugged. It's exhausting. When did you get so wise? Neil asked, genuinely curious. Probably around the time I found Mom crying over Mr. Fletcher's text while telling you she was working late. Cassidy replied matter-of-factly. I figured out pretty fast that grown-ups lie a lot. Neil felt a stab of pain at his daughter's lost innocence. Not all grown-ups. And not about everything. You don't, Cassidy agreed. That's why I wanted to stay with you. After dinner, they exchanged one gift each, their new tradition for Christmas Eve. Neil gave Cassidy a delicate silver bracelet with 2 charms, a tiny house, and a volleyball, representing the 2 things she loved most. Cassidy presented Neil with a hand-bound book titled Dad's Best Dad Jokes, illustrated with her own drawings. So you never forget the funny ones, she explained seriously. Later, as Cassidy slept peacefully in her room, Neil sat on the lanai with his laptop, finalizing the details of tomorrow's event. The video was complete. 27 minutes of meticulously compiled evidence, narrated with clinical precision, exposing every betrayal, every lie, every manipulation his family had participated in. It began with Vanessa and Roger's affair, documented through text messages, security footage, and financial records. It continued with his parents' willful blindness and eventual complicity, evidenced by emails between Diane and Vanessa coordinating their stories. It detailed Patricia's role as messenger and enabler, revealed through recorded phone conversations Maya had legally obtained. Most painfully, it showed Thomas's gradual transformation from confused, hurt son to active participant in the campaign against Neil, coached by Vanessa, encouraged by Howard and Diane, all in service of a custody arrangement that would give Vanessa and Roger the freedom to move to California with both children. The video concluded with Neil's direct address to each family member. To Vanessa, I trusted you with my heart, my children, and my future. You've lost the right to any of them. The offshore accounts you thought were hidden are now frozen pending investigation. The career connections I provided are withdrawn. The life you built on my foundation is over. To Roger, you entered my home under the guise of friendship while plotting to take everything I valued. The construction of your island home is permanently halted. The permits have been revoked due to anonymous tips about environmental violations. The millions you've invested are now tied up in legal battles that will last years. To his parents, you raised me to value truth, loyalty, and family above all else, then abandoned those principles when they became inconvenient. Your legacies of judicial integrity and charitable work will now be shadowed by this documented betrayal of your own son and granddaughter. To Patricia, you chose the path of least resistance, as you always have. Your complicity in this situation is now a matter of record, which may interest the ethics board at your law firm. And finally, to Thomas, son, you've been manipulated by the adults who should have protected you from exactly this kind of emotional damage. I will always love you and will always be your father. When you're ready to hear the truth without their filtering, I'll be waiting. Until then, I've instructed my attorney to suspend my custody petition. I won't force you to live with a father you've been taught to fear and resent. The video ended with a simple statement. I've provided copies of all this evidence to my attorney, local law enforcement, and select members of our community. The truth is no longer hidden. Merry Christmas. Neil closed the laptop, knowing that at 8:15 a.m. Seattle time, 11:15 a.m. in Hawaii, the video would be simultaneously delivered to every family member's email and phone. By the time they gathered for Christmas morning breakfast at Howard and Diane's home, the physical packages Bryce would deliver would already have been opened, containing printed copies of key evidence along with personalized letters detailing the specific consequences each person would face. Neil had spared no one except Cassidy, the child who had seen through the lies and chosen truth, even when it was harder, less comfortable, and decidedly not festive. As he prepared for bed, Neil's phone vibrated with a text that had broken through his Do Not Disturb setting. A message from Thomas, the first direct communication from his son in months. Dad, where are you? Grandma says you're not coming tomorrow. Please come. I need to talk to you. Neil stared at the message, his resolve momentarily wavering. Was he making a terrible mistake? Should he cancel everything, fly back to Seattle, and try once more to reach his son through conventional means? Then he scrolled up, seeing the previous messages from Thomas over the past months. Leave Mom alone. You're ruining everything. I don't want to come for visitation this weekend. Or ever. Stop trying to control everyone. That's why Mom left you. Messages that echoed Vanessa's words, Howard's sentiments, Diane's manipulations. Not Thomas's authentic voice, but the voice they had programmed him to use. No, Neil decided. The plan would proceed. Sometimes the only way to save someone was to remove the influences poisoning them. Thomas might hate him tomorrow, next week, next year. But someday, when he was old enough to recognize manipulation for what it was, he would understand why his father had chosen this path. Neil sent a simple reply. I love you, Thomas. Always have, always will. We'll talk soon. Then he turned off his phone completely, determined to be fully present for Cassidy on Christmas morning, even as their world back home imploded with surgical precision. Chapter 7. Controlled Demolition. Christmas morning in Kauai dawned with perfect blue skies and gentle trade winds rustling the palm trees outside their rental. Neil woke early, preparing a breakfast of fresh tropical fruits, coconut pancakes, and Kona coffee before rousing Cassidy for their gift exchange. Her delight at the new volleyball equipment, art supplies, and tech gadgets he'd carefully selected momentarily pushed aside thoughts of what was unfolding nearly 3,000 miles away. For those precious morning hours, Neil was simply a father celebrating Christmas with his beloved daughter, not an architect of familial destruction. At precisely 11:10 a.m. Hawaii time, Neil excused himself while Cassidy tested her new waterproof camera in the pool. In the privacy of his bedroom, he turned on his phone and watched as notifications flooded the screen. 47 missed calls, 93 text messages, 31 emails, all from the same 5 people, Vanessa, Howard, Diane, Patricia, and Roger. None from Thomas. At 11:15 a.m., Neil's phone rang with a call from his mother. He answered without speaking. How could you do this to us? Diane's voice was nearly unrecognizable, raw with emotion and fear. Those officers, the papers they brought. Neil, please tell me you haven't shown this to the police. The police have copies of everything, Neil confirmed calmly, as do several journalists, my attorney, and the partners at Patricia's firm. The evidence speaks for itself, Mom. This will destroy us all. Your father's reputation should have been his primary concern when he decided to help Vanessa manipulate Thomas and exclude Cassidy from family gatherings. We never met. Intentions are irrelevant. Actions have consequences. You've all acted against me and Cassidy for months. Now you face the consequences. Neil, please. His mother's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Roger is threatening to sue everyone. Vanessa is hysterical. Thomas is locked in his room and won't speak to anyone. We can fix this. As a family, just recall whatever you've sent to the authorities. It's too late for that, Neil replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath the surface. The evidence has been delivered. The investigations will proceed. The truth is out. And Thomas, what about your son? Do you think he'll ever forgive you for this? Neil closed his eyes briefly. That's a risk I had to take. He deserves to know the truth, even if it hurts him now. This isn't about truth. Diane hissed. This is revenge, plain and simple. No, Mom. Revenge would be destroying you all without warning, without explanation, without chance for redemption. This is justice. I've simply ensured that everyone's true actions and choices are known, not just the sanitized version you've all been promoting. A new voice came on the line. Howard, his judicial authority evident even in crisis. Neil, you need to withdraw these allegations immediately. The damage to this family was inflicted long before today, Neil interrupted. By you, by Mom, by Vanessa, by Patricia. I'm simply bringing it to light. And enjoying our suffering in the process, I suppose, Howard accused. I take no joy in this, Dad. Only resolution. After the call ended, Neil stepped onto the lanai to find Cassidy watching him solemnly, her wet hair dripping onto the tiles. It happened, didn't it? She asked quietly. The thing you were planning. Neil nodded, unwilling to lie to the one person who had shown him unwavering loyalty. Yes. Is everyone really mad? Very. Cassidy considered this. Will we ever go back to how things were before? Neil crouched to meet her eyes. No, sweetheart. But sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly. Like when you have to tear down a wall that has bad stuff inside it. Exactly like that. Neil brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. The old wall looked fine on the surface, but it was rotting from within. Now we'll build something honest and strong, even if it's smaller than what we had before. Cassidy nodded sagely. With just the good people. With just the good people, Neil agreed. Throughout the day, the messages continued to pour in. Threats from Roger's attorney, pleas from Patricia, increasingly unhinged texts from Vanessa. Neil read them all but responded to none, focusing instead on creating positive memories with Cassidy, building sandcastles on the beach, snorkeling in a protected cove, enjoying shave ice under swaying palms. That evening, as they watched the sunset from their lanai, Neil received a single text from Thomas, the first direct communication since the video had been delivered. I hate you for this. You've ruined everything. The words cut deep, but Neil had anticipated them. Thomas was still processing, still under the influence of those who had manipulated him. Time and distance would eventually allow the truth to penetrate. Neil replied simply, I understand you're hurt and angry. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here. I love you, son. That has never and will never change. There was no response. As Cassidy fell asleep that night, exhausted from their day of adventure, Neil sat on the lanai with a glass of whiskey, mentally preparing for the next phase. The demolition was complete. Now came the difficult part, sorting through the rubble to determine what, if anything, could be salvaged. Chapter 8. Foundations of Truth. The remaining days in Hawaii passed in a curious blend of holiday joy with Cassidy and strategic planning for their return to Seattle. Neil maintained minimal contact with the outside world, responding only to communications from Sylvia Patel and Detective Maddox, who confirmed that investigations into financial improprieties were proceeding. Roger Fletcher's attorney is demanding a meeting, Sylvia reported during their daily call. He's threatening countersuits for defamation, invasion of privacy, corporate espionage, everything but the kitchen sink. Let him, Neil replied coolly. Every legal action he takes gives us further access to discovery. Does he really want his financial records scrutinized more closely? Apparently not. His tone changed considerably when I mentioned the offshore accounts and the transaction patterns that suggest money laundering. And Vanessa? She's filed an emergency motion to modify the custody arrangement, claiming your video constitutes parental alienation and psychological abuse of Thomas. Neil had anticipated this, and Judge Watkins has scheduled a hearing for January 3rd. In the meantime, he's ordered a full psychiatric evaluation of Thomas and suspended all visitation pending the results. Including Vanessa's? Yes, Thomas is temporarily placed with your parents. Neil processed this information with mixed emotions. The suspension of visitation was a blow, but having Thomas away from Vanessa's direct influence was a strategic advantage. What about Cassidy? No change to your custody arrangement. The judge noted her remarkable stability despite family turmoil in his preliminary findings. After the call, Neil joined Cassidy on the beach for their final afternoon in paradise. As they built an elaborate sand castle complete with moat and bridges, he broached the subject of their return. Things will be different when we get home, he explained, carefully sculpting a tower. There might be some meetings with lawyers, maybe some people asking you questions about Mom and me, about Grandma and Grandpa. Cassidy nodded, focused on digging the moat deeper. Because of your Christmas video? Yes. How did you know about that? She shrugged. I heard you talking to Ms. Patel, and I saw you working on it before we left. She looked up, squinting against the sun. Is that why everyone's so mad? Because you told their secrets? Neil considered how much to share with his perceptive daughter. Yes, I showed evidence of things they wanted to keep hidden. Like Mom and Mr. Fletcher? Neil's hands stilled in the sand. You knew about them? I saw them kissing once, when you were in Portland for that big project. Cassidy's matter-of-fact tone belied the significance of her revelation. Mom said it was a secret game and I shouldn't tell anyone, especially not you. A cold fury rose in Neil's chest. Vanessa had made their 12-year-old daughter complicit in her deception, burdening her with an adult secret she should never have had to carry. Cassidy, I'm so sorry she put you in that position. That wasn't fair to you. I know. That's one reason I chose to live with you. Cassidy patted the sand-castle wall firmly. You don't make me keep secrets or pretend things are okay when they're not. They returned to Seattle on December 30th, the holiday decorations throughout the city seeming oddly discordant with the reality of their situation. Neil had made arrangements to avoid any potential confrontations, a private car from the airport, additional security for their townhouse, temporary blocks on calls from certain numbers. Despite these precautions, Neil knew direct confrontation was inevitable. It came sooner than expected, in the form of Patricia waiting in his office when he returned to work on January 2nd. How did you get in here? He asked, setting down his briefcase. Bryce let me in. Patricia looked exhausted, her normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. We need to talk, Neil. I believe we said everything that needed saying through our respective attorneys. This isn't about legal strategies. Patricia leaned forward. This is about Thomas. He's not eating, barely sleeping. He refuses therapy. Mom and Dad are at their wits' end, and Vanessa. She trailed off. Vanessa what? She tried to leave the state with him. There was an incident at the airport. She's under house arrest now, pending charges for attempted custodial interference. Neil absorbed this information, unsurprised but still concerned. And Thomas? He needs his father. Not the cold, calculating man who created that video, but the dad who taught him to build tree houses and cheered at his soccer games. That father never left, Neil replied quietly. He was pushed aside to make room for a narrative where I was the villain and Vanessa was the victim. Patricia had the grace to look ashamed. We made mistakes. Serious ones. But Thomas is the one suffering now. What do you suggest? Come to Mom and Dad's tonight. Talk to him. Just you and Thomas, with a family counselor present if you want. No lawyers, no recordings, no evidence. Just a father and his son trying to find their way back to each other. Neil studied his sister, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Finding none, he nodded slowly. 8 o'clock. And Patricia, if this is another attempt to manipulate the situation, it will be the last communication we ever have. It's not, she promised. We've all learned our lesson about underestimating you. The Harrington family home looked exactly as it always had. Imposing colonial architecture, perfectly maintained grounds, tasteful holiday decorations still adorning the entrance. Yet Neil felt like a stranger approaching a fortress rather than a son returning home. Howard opened the door, his expression guarded but not hostile. Neil, thank you for coming. I'm here for Thomas, Neil clarified. Nothing else. Of course. Howard stepped aside. He's in the den. The counselor, Dr. Reyes, arrived a few minutes ago. Neil found Thomas slumped on the leather sofa, his lankiness accentuated by recent weight loss. At 14, he was caught in that awkward phase between boy and young man, his features sharpening to resemble Neil's, his posture defensive and wary. Dr. Reyes, a calm-looking woman in her 50s, made introductions and established ground rules for their conversation. Thomas remained silent throughout, avoiding eye contact with everyone. When they were finally left alone, Neil sat across from his son, maintaining a respectful distance. I know you're angry, he began softly. You have every right to be. You destroyed everything. Thomas muttered, the first words he'd spoken since Neil's arrival. Mom's going to jail. Grandma can't stop crying. Mr. Fletcher left. Everyone hates everyone else. I exposed the truth, Neil corrected gently. The destruction began long before my video. Thomas finally looked up, his eyes, so like Neil's own, filled with confusion and pain. Did Mom really try to coach me to lie about you? Yes. And the money stuff with Mr. Fletcher? Was that real too? Every document in that video was authentic, Thomas. I wouldn't lie to you, even to win you back. Thomas seemed to collapse in on himself. I don't know what's real anymore. Mom says one thing. You say another. Grandma and Grandpa change their story depending on who's in the room. That's the problem with lies, Neil said quietly. They have to keep changing to stay consistent. The truth doesn't have that problem. So what happens now? Thomas asked, his voice small and uncertain. That depends partly on you, Neil replied honestly. The court has temporarily suspended both my and your mother's visitation rights while they assess the situation. You'll stay with Grandma and Grandpa for now. And Cassidy? She'll continue living with me. But she misses you. We both do. Thomas picked at a loose thread on his jeans. I said horrible things to you. In texts and stuff. You were angry and confused. manipulated by people you trusted. That doesn't make it okay. Neil leaned forward. No, it doesn't. But it makes it understandable. We all make mistakes, Thomas. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. A long silence stretched between them before Thomas spoke again. I don't think I can forgive Mom. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You don't have to decide that now. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. What about you? Thomas asked, looking directly at Neil. Will you ever forgive Mom? Or Grandma and Grandpa? Neil considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't really about absolving someone else. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. I'm working on setting down that burden. But trust, that's different. Trust requires actions, not just words. I don't know if that can ever be rebuilt with certain people. Thomas nodded slowly, processing this distinction. Can I see Cassidy sometime? Even before all the court stuff is figured out. I think that could be arranged. She'd like that very much. As their time drew to a close, Thomas hesitantly moved toward Neil, initiating an awkward but genuine hug, the first physical contact they'd had in months. Dad, he whispered. I'm sorry I believed them instead of you. Neil held his son tightly, feeling a crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing at all. As he left the Harrington family home that night, Neil felt a curious lightness. Not forgiveness. He wasn't ready for that, but perhaps the first step toward whatever came after devastation. Not rebuilding, exactly, but clearing ground for something entirely new. Chapter 9, Structural Evolution. 6 months after the Christmas that changed everything, Neil stood on the observation deck of the Space Needle, watching a summer sunset paint Seattle in hues of gold and amber. Beside him, Cassidy and Thomas pointed out landmarks to each other. Their easy companionship restored after weeks of supervised visits had gradually transitioned to regular overnight stays. The legal aftermath of Neil's Christmas video had been extensive and complex. Vanessa had ultimately pled guilty to attempted custodial interference, receiving a suspended sentence and mandatory counseling. The financial investigations had revealed even deeper improprieties in Roger Fletcher's business dealings, resulting in federal charges that were still pending. Howard and Diane Harrington had retreated from their social circles, humiliated by the public exposure of their role in the family drama. Howard had accelerated his retirement from the bench, citing health concerns that weren't entirely fictional. The stress had exacerbated his heart condition, necessitating surgery in March. Patricia had perhaps undergone the most significant transformation, facing an ethics review at her firm that had forced her to confront her own complicity in the situation. Her relationship with Neil remained fragile, but was slowly being rebuilt on more honest foundations. As for Neil himself, he had emerged from the crucible neither victorious nor defeated, but fundamentally changed. The trusting man who believed in second chances was gone forever. In his place stood someone more cautious, more discerning, and paradoxically, more at peace with the imperfections of human connection. Dad, can we get ice cream before we go to the movie? Cassidy asked, interrupting his reflections. Absolutely, Neil agreed, checking his watch. We have time. As they rode the elevator down, Thomas asked quietly, Is Mom still coming to my graduation next week? The middle school graduation ceremony had become a delicate negotiation point. Under the new custody arrangement finalized in April, Neil had primary physical custody of both children, with Vanessa granted supervised visitation that would be reassessed after 6 months of consistent compliance with court-ordered therapy and parenting classes. Yes, but separately from us. As we discussed, Neil confirmed. She'll be seated in a different section with her sponsor from the program. Thomas nodded, relief evident in his expression. He was learning to navigate his complicated feelings toward his mother, anger and betrayal balanced against residual love and attachment, with the help of Dr. Reyes, who had transitioned from crisis counselor to regular therapist for both children. And Grandma and Grandpa? They'll be there too, also in their own section. Neil kept his tone neutral, maintaining his practice of never speaking negatively about family members to the children, despite his personal feelings. The new boundaries Neil had established with his parents were strict, but not punitive. They could see the children at specific events and during scheduled visits that gradually increased in frequency as they demonstrated respect for Neil's parental authority. Trust was being rebuilt incrementally, brick by careful brick. As they exited the Space Needle, Neil's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Fletcher's attorney called again, offering another settlement. Higher than last time. Details in your email. Neil tucked the phone away without responding. Roger Fletcher had been trying to negotiate a private settlement for months, desperate to avoid the public trial that would expose even more of his financial and personal improprieties. Neil had rejected each offer, not out of vengeance, but principle. Some actions needed to face full accountability in the light of day. Dad, look. Cassidy pointed to a street performer creating elaborate bubble sculptures that caught the evening light. Can we watch for a minute? Sure. Neil agreed, watching as his children laughed together at the shimmering creations, ephemeral, beautiful, and ultimately fragile, much like the relationships he was carefully reconstructing. Later that evening, after the movie and ice cream, after Thomas had chosen to stay overnight at Neil's townhouse rather than return to Howard and Diane's, after both children were asleep, Neil sat in his study reviewing the final plans for his newest project. Harrington Custom Homes was building something unprecedented, a community of sustainable, affordable homes on land Neil had purchased outside Seattle. The project, called New Foundations, represented everything Neil had learned through his personal and professional journey. The importance of starting with honest assessment, building with integrity, and creating structures that could withstand both expected and unforeseen challenges. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, their communication now limited to co-parenting matters and conducted primarily through a court-approved app. Thomas left his science project at my apartment during yesterday's visit. He'll need it for Monday. Can I drop it off tomorrow? Neil considered the request. 6 months ago, he would have refused any deviation from the strict visitation schedule, requiring Vanessa to deliver the project to Thomas's court-appointed supervisor instead. Now, he recognized the small gesture for what it was, not an attempt to manipulate or intrude, but a mother trying to responsibly support her son's education despite her reduced role in his life. Yes, 10 a.m. works. You can leave it with the doorman. Her response came quickly. Thank you. Neil set down his phone, reflecting on the evolution of his approach. His fundamental principle remained unchanged. He would never fully trust Vanessa again, never invite her back into the inner circle of his life, never pretend that her betrayal hadn't permanently altered their family structure. But maintaining righteous anger as his primary emotional state had proven exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. Instead, he had found a middle path, one that privileged protection of his children and himself without requiring constant vigilance or vindictiveness. He would never forgive in the sense of pretending the harm hadn't occurred or allowing those who had betrayed him back into positions where they could inflict similar damage. But he had learned to release the active anger, to stop carrying it as a shield and weapon. A soft knock at his study door interrupted his thoughts. Thomas stood in the doorway, hair rumpled from sleep. Can't sleep? Neil asked. Thomas shook his head. I was thinking about something Dr. Reyes said today, about how families are like ecosystems, always changing and adapting. That sounds accurate. She said sometimes a forest fire that looks like total destruction actually helps certain types of seeds germinate. That without the fire, they'd never grow. Thomas leaned against the doorframe. I think that's what happened with us. Your Christmas video was like a fire that burned everything down, but now new things are growing. Neil studied his son, impressed by his insight. That's a powerful metaphor. Do you resent me for starting the fire? Thomas considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But then I remember that the fire was coming one way or another. At least your way, we all survived it. He paused. Mom asked me yesterday if I thought you'd ever forgive her. What did you tell her? That forgiveness isn't really what she should be asking for. She should be asking for acceptance of the new reality. Thomas shrugged. Dr. Reyes says I'm getting better at establishing healthy boundaries. Neil smiled. She's right about that. Dad. Thomas looked suddenly younger, more vulnerable. Are we going to be okay? All of us, I mean. Neil rose and crossed to his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. We already are okay, Thomas. Not perfect, not unchanged, but okay. We're building something different now, something honest. And honest structures, even when they're smaller or simpler than what came before, are always stronger in the long run. Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Night, Dad. Good night, son. As Thomas disappeared back toward his bedroom, Neil returned to his desk and closed the architectural plans for New Foundations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Vanessa's brief visit, Howard and Diane's weekly call requesting expanded grandparent time, Patricia's tentative invitation for coffee to discuss family healing. Neil would navigate each interaction with the clarity that had emerged from the Christmas demolition. He would protect what mattered: his children, his integrity, his hard-won peace. He would maintain boundaries with those who had proven themselves untrustworthy. He would continue building his new life with the precision and patience that had always characterized his best work. And he would remember, always, that some structures must fall completely before something stronger can rise in their place. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.